Well, hello, families, and welcome back. We're super excited to have you here. And thank you for joining us for our Family U Chats, which is our webinar series for our families of our current students. And in our Family U Chat series, we really focus on connecting you all with the folks on campus who can really answer the questions that are relevant to you. And so, as you all are kind of joining, we have a lot of webinars coming up in the next this week. So you will hear today about on-campus housing, and then on Wednesday we'll have a webinar about move-in for spring, and then in next week we'll do one about education abroad. And so we have a lot of webinars coming up right before the spring semester gets started. As always, our webinars are recorded and they are available on our website, and they are also available on our Facebook page. And so you can always go back and reference them, share them with your student if you need to. And so really thank you all for being here. And we're going to get started. I'm going to turn it over to Justin Dowd, who's going to talk to you about the housing assignments process.
Hi, everyone, and thanks, Jonathan. My name's Justin Dowd. I am one of the assistant directors in residential life assignments, and glad that you're all here to kind of listen to what I've got to share today. Specifically, we're going to be focusing today on what steps your students are going to be taking for fall room selection. Now, I'm going to share my screen here just so you all can actually see the presentation that I've got put together for you all. And actually, before I even get into this presentation, I wanted to talk very quickly about spring. Today, January 13th, is the last day that new students can submit a preference application to apply for on-campus housing. If your student is not sure if they have submitted their preference application, please have them give our office a call today. Our number is 413-545-2100, so that my staff can take a look and make sure that we have everything that we need from your student. We absolutely have space. We feel confident that we're going to be able to assign everybody for the spring, but in order to make sure that we can do that, we need to get housing preferences from you. And if there's any issues that you all have, I just want to make sure that we can, respond to that today and make sure that your student can be on time for submitting their preferences. So with that, let's actually shift into talking a little bit more about fall online room selection. So who is actually eligible to participate in those processes? That's going to be any student that currently lives on campus for spring of 2025. I can't imagine that there's a lot of students that are here, or that you have students that are coming back from an exchange and abroad or a co-op program, since you're all likely new students coming in for the spring. So just make sure that your students have an on-campus assignment for the spring, and they'll be eligible to participate in those processes. So to participate, the most important thing is that students have to request an appointment. Another really critical thing is that every student that wants to participate has to request their own. There is something that we'll talk about a little bit called group formation, where kind of one student is going to kind of take responsibility for potentially one other student or a group of other students. But it's critical that every individual requests their own appointment. If they don't, then that group leader isn't able to kind of connect with those students. All appointments are going to be based on something called priority, which is the number of semesters that they live on campus. So for your students coming in, they're not going to have any semesters completed on campus, but we're going to talk a little bit more about what we do for newly admitted students to ensure that they have an opportunity to get on-campus housing for the fall. And that priority system is going to determine when their appointment falls within those processes as well. So now let's actually talk a little bit about the processes that we'll be offering. So these are the two main processes: the 2025 shared room selection process and the 2025 single plus room selection process. Any student that is admitted for spring 24, fall 24, or spring 2025, which is, I imagine, most of the students that are here right now, are going to be eligible for that shared room selection process. That process is only going to include spaces that are shared rooms with a limited number of singles in areas that have suites. But the important thing to note about the shared room selection process is that there will be enough spaces within that process for every student who has an appointment to select something. And so while they may have more limited options for single rooms, they are essentially, as long as they're following our timelines, essentially guaranteed the ability to secure on-campus housing, as long as they're following those timelines and selecting an assignment when their appointment begins. There is also the single plus room selection process. Primarily, the students in that process are folks that were admitted in fall 2023 or earlier. And those students will see primarily spaces that are single rooms with some limited shared room options that aren't being used in that shared room selection process. The difference there is that single plus process does not have enough spaces in it for every student that has an appointment. And so what that means is that it is possible that some students with that appointment may not have an option to select a space. The shared room selection, every student will have the ability to select something. There are two other processes to just be aware of, and that is the CHCRC, so the Commonwealth Honors College Residential Community Suite process and the apartment process. Any student who is in good standing will be eligible for this process as well. And ultimately, it's going to fall very similarly to the process that we just talked about. Students that were admitted in spring of last year through spring of right now will be in the process for suites, whereas students who are admitted fall 2023 or earlier will be seeing options for apartments. Again, there are more suites than there are apartment spaces, but I will be very realistic. We have more students who are members of the Commonwealth Honors College than there are spaces in our communities. It's about 800 spaces in the apartments and the suites. And we do typically fill all of those spaces, but we want to give students as much opportunity as possible to try and get into those options. So that's definitely available for any of the students that are being admitted as part of the Commonwealth Honors College. Something else for students to consider is defined residential communities. These are typically identity-based communities where students have kind of similar goals or similar ideals that they are looking for in their peers that they are living on campus with. So I've listed the options here. There's the Asian American community. There's a disability defined residential community. El Barrio is our Latinx community. Harambe is our African heritage community, and then Spectrum is our LGBTQIA plus community as well. All of those options are available for incoming new transfer students to apply for in the fall. The application deadline, this is a slightly different process. Students do need to submit an application, and that application is found on our website. There's a whole section that's about our defined residential communities. If any of these communities seem of interest, I might encourage you to apply for these. It's worth noting that this process, the defined residential community process, actually happens before our general online room selection process. And so students that have applied for these communities do get a slightly earlier opportunity to select within the communities that they apply and are accepted for. The main process, though, that students are going to use is fall 2025 room selection. Students are going to get notified about this on the day that the process begins, which is February 18th. And students need to make sure that if they are even considering living on campus, that they have requested an appointment by no later than March 14th. As an important timeline, that is the Friday before spring break begins. And so just make sure that they have requested that appointment by then to make sure that they're eligible. We're going to go over exactly what that appointment request looks like, but I won't spend a lot of time on that because I recognize that we are, a little over a month out from that at this point. And we're going to have more opportunities to connect with your students before then to make sure that they actually know what to do and what steps to take. But we'll go over all that here as well. Right after we come back from spring break, students' appointments will post for those students, and that's when you'll see which processes that you were eligible for, or you'll see your appointments for which processes that you're eligible for. And then from March 26th through April 4th is actually when you'll be selecting your housing assignment. And so that will be the window of time where students will not only be able to see what spaces are available for next fall, but will be able to select from those options as well. But the really critical piece here, and the thing to to continue to check in about students after this process is opened, is make sure that if they are in any way considering living on campus, that they have requested their appointment by March 14th. I'm going to warn you in advance. I'm going to say that a whole bunch during my presentation right now because it's such an important day for our students. And if they miss that deadline, there are some pretty significant consequences in terms of being able to get on-campus housing for the fall. So now, how do you actually request an appointment? And again, this is kind of me saying all of what I just said again, but even if you're not sure, if you haven't signed a lease for somewhere off campus in fall of 2025, request an appointment. I want to stress that requesting an appointment doesn't lock your students into any fees or anything like that. It just ensures that they are able to see what spaces are available, and it gives them more time to make some decisions. If they ultimately request an appointment and don't select a housing assignment, it really truly is no harm, no foul. It gives them an ability to see what's there, and if they decide that that's not something that they need or not something that they want, that is 100% okay. If they don't request the appointment, we will get more on-time requests than we have spaces on campus, and so we won't be able to give students late appointments for this process. And so really, again, stress to your students that that March 14th date is really important. So now actually requesting the appointment, there's two things that a student needs to do first. They will need to sign the most updated version of the occupancy license. They'll need to do that after or on or after February 18th, and they'll need to resubmit their housing profile. These are two things that students needed to do to submit their preference application already, so they should know what steps to take here. And at least for the housing profile, it really should just be that they're going in, reviewing the answers to those 4 questions, and if the answers are different now, updating their answers. Otherwise, they can just hit the submit button on that page. Once these 2 steps are done, then they'll be able to actually request their new appointment starting on the 17th, or sorry, on the 18th of February. So on the room selection homepage, there's going to be a big button that says request a new appointment. And there's a couple of pieces of information that I just want to kind of point out here. One, you can see that the request a new appointment button on this version is grayed out. That's what students would see if they went in right now and tried to request an appointment. But starting on the 18th, as long as they have signed their occupancy license and submitted their housing profile, and of course they have an on-campus housing assignment, that request a new appointment button will be clickable, and they will be able to follow the steps to actually request their appointment. Now, I want to stress, again, we'll talk a little bit more about this as we go. You don't have to be the first person to request an appointment. When you request your appointment does not impact when your appointment will begin. Your appointment will be based on room selection priority. We'll talk a little bit more about what that means soon, but I just want to stress it's okay if your student doesn't request it right at 12:01 on the 18th. We don't need students staying up, super late if they've got an early class the following morning. They just need to request an appointment by the 14th of March. But once they've requested their appointment, you'll see that there's a section right above that request a new appointment button that says appointment requests. As soon as you've successfully requested that appointment, it will show up in that area above. And so if your student pulls up their Spire screen for you and they say, of course I requested my appointment, and you don't see something in that assignment processes section, that they haven't done what they need to do, and either work with them to try it again or have them give our office a call so that we can help them. Because the last thing that we want is someone to think that they've completed a step and they actually haven't. When appointments actually post, which won't happen again until the 24th around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, then that section below the request a new appointment will be filled with whatever appointments that the students have been given based on their eligibility. So this is the next page after you click the request a new appointment button. It really just is. There will be one option with a radial button. You click the radial button and click submit, and that will officially request your appointment. So just making sure that your student knows exactly what the steps are. This page looks a little bit different now. We've recently updated Spire, and so it does have a slightly different layout. But ultimately, it's still click the radial button next to what will be the fall 2025 room selection process, and then click that submit button. And then kind of what I talked about before, this is where you'll see that. The other things that students get just to verify, they'll get a confirmation page in Spire, and they'll also get an email. And that is true of just about every step within this process. So they'll get an email when they sign their occupancy license. They'll get an email when they submit their housing profile. They'll get an email when they successfully request their appointment. If they don't see that successfully requested appointment email, then they've likely not requested their appointment. So please, please, please continue to kind of check in with your student. If they don't see that email or that appointment request section of the room selection homepage stays blank. We do send out reminders, and we send out reminders both to students and to families who have shared their email addresses with the university. So on February 18th is when we're going to send all of that information out. Students will get a message letting them know that appointment request is opened and what they're eligible for and how that process is going to work. We also send that information home to the email addresses that we have for parents. And so if you haven't already signed up for the parent newsletter, this is a really great plug to do that. They have a lot of really good information, but on top of that, we are able to request those emails during critical periods like this and make sure that you and your students are getting the same information. On top of that, we will send multiple reminders to students who have not taken an action. So for students, we will send really targeted information. You have signed the occupancy license, but you didn't submit your housing profile. You haven't requested your appointment. You signed the occupancy license, you submitted your profile, but you haven't requested your appointment. You haven't done anything. All of those things are things that we say to students. To parents, we aren't able to be as targeted because there's FERPA protections there. But if you get an email in early March that says, hey, have a conversation with your student. Has your student done something? What I'm telling you right now is that the only reason that you would get that message is if we have not received an appointment request. So make sure that if you do see that email come through that says, hey, we're just checking in, have a conversation with your student, it's critical that you follow up with your student because very likely they have not yet requested their appointment. Now, again, if they're not looking to live on campus, that's okay. They can disregard those messages. But if they do want to live on campus in the fall and you're getting those reminders, keep that in mind. So we'll send reminders on the 7th. We'll send a reminder again on the 12th. We will also send a final reminder that will just go to the student on the morning of the 14th to anyone who has not requested an appointment as one last check-in for folks to say, you still haven't done anything. If you're planning to live on campus, make sure to do this. So again, it's really, really, really critical when students have access to that. We're actually working on updating the video tutorials that we have right now. So I just want to stress that there are video tutorials on our website. And by the time the students are able to request appointments, we're very hopeful that those will all be updated and have critical step-by-steps for the entirety of the process, from requesting an appointment to forming a roommate group to searching and selecting for spaces. They're very detailed, they're very targeted, but if you watched all of them, it's probably going to take you about a half an hour. And so if you're a new student who has never used online room selection before, I would say it's a really, really good idea to review those because it will help you in the process. Or if it's more comfortable, come down to our office. We have staff that are here Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 5, and we can talk you step by step through the process there as well. So we're absolutely a good resource, but these video tutorials are great if, it's 7 o'clock at night and you're trying to figure something out about our processes. The tutorials will really comfortably step by step you through all of the things that you need to do. So room selection priority, that's going to be something that's made up of two numbers. It's how many semesters that you've lived on campus, and then something we call order within priority, which is essentially a tiebreaker for how many semesters that you've lived on campus. So showing this as an example, someone with a priority of 3, even though that order within priority for the other student is closer to 1, we always look at who has lived on campus longer to select earlier, and then we use, again, that order within priority as a tiebreaker. So if Anne in this example also had 3 semesters completed, then Anne would select before Chelsea. For your students who are all coming in, again, like I said, they won't have any semesters completed, but that's partly why we are using them or placing them into the shared room selection process to ensure that they will have the ability to select something. And then if there are other options that they want to look at, there are, of course, ways for them either over the summer or after we open the halls in the fall to try and change their assignment if they weren't able to select something that was maybe their first choice. So we definitely give students a lot of opportunities to change. I'm going to go through some really quick, frequently asked questions. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these just because, again, this is stuff that we're talking about 2 months in advance. But just in case this is going to be helpful, I did want to cover this. Within the process, students are going to will have what are called selection opportunities. That means within the process, a student has the ability to select and or change their assignment up to 3 times. Every time that they select an assignment for the fall, if they previously held a fall assignment, they release that back into the process for other students to select. I do want to stress that this is a real-time process. So if they select something that they really like and then select out of something, as soon as they select out of that space, another student with an appointment that's active could potentially select in. I'm realizing something that I just want to mention too, which is that when I say appointments, I'm not talking about a time where the student has to come to our office and meet with a staff member. This is an entirely online process, and probably the best way to compare it is like buying concert tickets, where you're going to see all the availability, all the spaces that are there, and whichever one feels like the best fit for you, you'll be able to select that once your appointment has begun. The other reason that I put this question in about selection opportunities is that some students sometimes think that it means that they can hold 3 spaces and then decide at some point which of those 3 that they want. It's not that. Every time that you select a new room, you will let go of whatever space you previously selected. So if you're really happy with your first assignment, don't select a new space unless the new space is better in your mind than the space that you initially selected. So are students guaranteed a space? Technically, no, students are not guaranteed a housing assignment for fall 25. However, again, as long as your student requests an on-time appointment by March 14th and they select a space when their appointment begins, there will be a space for them to select because they're getting that shared room selection appointment. We're making sure that they will have an ability to get an on-campus assignment for the fall. If they ultimately select something that they're not happy with, there will be options over the summer for students to change their housing assignment. And so I want to stress that, even if it's not their first choice, if they know for sure they want to live on campus, select the best space that's available when that appointment starts. Um, In the event that there are spaces that are not selected, either in the shared room selection process or the single plus process, we will make all of those spaces available to all students at the end of the process after everyone's appointment has begun. Typically, we do see that there are spaces in the shared room selection process that are still available. Historically, we have seen that the single plus process does tend to fill before we get to that point. But it is just worth noting that there absolutely will be some options that get moved over, and students will get appointments to make sure that they can select from any of those spaces once that appointment period has passed, once everyone's appointment has begun. We know that a lot of students want to form roommate groups. A roommate group is when two or more students link their accounts together. And it helps them to be able to select together if there are open spaces or if they're looking to live in a suite or something like that together. It's important to know that that it doesn't need to be the person with the earliest appointment time that is the group leader. One person is going to be the group leader, and that person is responsible for selecting for everyone else within the group, which means that it's a really important responsibility for whoever that person ultimately is. You can start forming groups once appointments have posted. You're not able to do it beforehand because everyone needs to have their appointment first, which again is why I really stress every individual student needs to request an appointment first. And it's also really important that those students are having a conversation if they're looking to form a roommate group. The really critical pieces that I would share is that the person who should be your group leader, if you're deciding to go with a roommate group, is the person who best understands the process. So if your student's the one who's going to come down to our office and ask either myself or my staff a million questions to really understand how this process works, that's really the person we want to be the group leader. Um, we also want to make sure that that person is going to be available when that appointment time begins. And just for some context, we always start appointments but during our workday, sometime typically between 8:30 and 5 p.m. And those appointments will start during class breaks or during standard class breaks. What we don't really want is for the average student to have to step out of class to be able to, of course, pick their housing for the upcoming year. So that's something else to just keep in mind. If your student maybe has a non-standard 3-hour lab on a Tuesday, they may not be the right person to be the group leader. Um, but again, if they form that roommate group, the group leader will pick on behalf of them, and the members should be gentle but firm about reminding their group leader to actually select that space on their behalf. So now the tough part. What if your student misses the appointment request deadline? Please, 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 please don't let your student be this person. Again, going back to if they miss the initial deadline, they won't be eligible for that process. Students who do request an appointment but don't select will have an opportunity during our change process that we offer in June to try and select a space after everyone with an on-time assignment has had the ability to change. Anyone who missed the appointment request deadline, anyone who didn't request their own appointment, will have to wait for our unassigned process, and students don't select those spaces until late July. The reason for that is that we are obligated to ensure that new students are assigned to a space before we can work with folks who are current and either missed our deadlines or are looking to come back on campus from an off-campus situation. So really, really stress, don't have your student be one of the folks that's in this situation. Make sure that they're requesting their appointment by the 14th. If they are sure that they want to live on campus, make sure that they're picking something when their appointment actually begins during that period of time when selection happens. We talked about this a little bit. There are ways for students to change their assignment if they don't get their first choice space. They should keep using our processes. Students who are happy in their assignment are not typically looking to move, which will give those students that are looking to make changes a little bit more opportunity and a little bit less competition once we get to those processes over the summer. One couple of really quick and small things. There are limitations around the Commonwealth Honors College residential community. Like I said, there are more honors students than there are spaces in that community. And so only students that are members of the Commonwealth Honors College who are in good standing are going to be eligible for that process. And so what that means is that if there's a fourth student, say, who is not a member of the Honors College, they won't be able to select into the Commonwealth Honors College residential community as part of this process. They'll need to select something in our general housing first. Or if the priority is for everyone to live together, everyone should be looking in the process where everyone has an appointment, not just those 3 students, if that makes sense. The other piece is that when you form a roommate group, you can form a roommate group in in both processes. And if you have multiple appointments, you should form a roommate group in every single process that you have an appointment for, if that's what you're looking for. I don't want to get too in depth on this, but really what this is as we get closer, encourage your students to make sure that they're asking us questions or coming to talk with us, because we love having these conversations. We'd much rather have these check-ins talk about our process in advance when we can help them make adjustments or help them to come up with alternate plans. Because after the deadlines have passed, it's much harder for us to work with them because they may not be eligible for the processes. And with that, I know Jonathan has been kind of keeping an eye on the chat window. If folks have questions, feel free to throw those questions into the chat. Jonathan will read them out to me, and I'll be happy to answer those as well.
All right, Justin. So our first question is really to kind of repeat something that you said a couple of times, but to make sure that the appointments when requests can only be requested between the 18th of February and March 14th, not before February 18th.
That's 100% right. So the first day that you can request an appointment is the 18th. You can, and like I said as well, that's also the first day that you can sign the most updated version of the occupancy license. And just as a reminder, we will send every eligible student who lives on campus an email about that on the 18th to make sure that they know that this process has started.
So the next question is about if a student is studying abroad. And I think
Mhm.
this question, you kind of answered this when you said that it's not actually an appointment with someone in your office. So it doesn't
Right,
have to happen via Zoom, is what the
right.
question was. But can you just kind of explain again what you mean by an appointment?
Sure. So I'm actually going to speak to a couple pieces there from what Jonathan talked about. First, students that are, say that your student's best friend is currently in an abroad program, having a wonderful time in Madrid, and they're looking to come back to campus in the fall. Those students are 100% eligible to participate in these processes as well. Basically, any student that is returning from an abroad program, participating in a co-op or an internship, or is a domestic exchange student, all of those students are eligible to participate in this process and secure housing. Most of those students, I expect, will be in the single process, but there may be some students that are eligible. Now, again, the process for selecting housing assignments is an entirely online process. If students need help, they're welcome to come to our office. We'll happily talk them through the steps. But in terms of the actions that a student is taking, it's not meeting with a staff member here. It's not meeting with your RD or your RA. You'll go into your Spire account. Everything's really managed on the room selection homepage, from searching for spaces to selecting into a room. And so, again, we're here to help, but certainly not, they don't need to feel like they need to come to our office to do any of these steps.
All right, so our next question is if a student lives off campus but wants to move back onto campus,
Mhm.
will they be notified that this process has started?
They won't be. So we will have all of that information. In fact, all of it is already published on our website. But the processes that we've focused on today, unassigned students, folks living off campus, are not eligible for these processes. We're obligated to work with current on-campus students, and then the other group of students are exchange, abroad, and co-op internship students. After that, our next priority is to work with new students, new incoming first years, new incoming transfers. And once we've met that demand is when we can work with unassigned students or those folks that have missed deadlines. Now, I want to stress that we've been in a very good position, even if we do fill all of our spaces in the processes that we're talking about right now that happen in March and April. We have not been in a position where we've needed to turn students away using our late processes for a couple of years at this point. We work really closely with cancellations. We typically do take quite a few cancellations over the break. And we will, of course, make those spaces available to anyone who's looking to get on-campus housing. But our priority, at least initially, is to ensure that current on-campus and all those other eligibility students have the opportunity before we can work with unassigned students.
So the next question is about a safety thing.
Okay.
if a student chooses to live off campus, is the university notified in some way? Do they update their address? Kind of what does that look like?
Sure. So one of the things that we would absolutely encourage is that if a student is deciding to move off campus, that's something that they can update. They can update their address right in Spire so that they can, we can see that information and be able to know where the student's plan is. Um, and if ultimately a student, it is their choice, and if they decide that they're no longer interested in living on campus, if they sign a lease off, we will send them as many reminders as possible about how they can get on campus housing. But if they ultimately choose to move off campus, A, we're not going to stop them from doing that. They're welcome to, as long as they're not a freshman. Freshmen are required to live on campus. And there are some really great resources on campus that I would really point students to as well, specifically the off-campus student life office, who really does a great job of helping to set students up for success if they are moving off campus, because a lot of those students, it's their first chance moving and living on their own somewhere, and learning how to navigate all of the interesting challenges of how do you share a utility bill with your roommates? How do you make sure that, your roommates understand what is and isn't yours in the fridge? How do you have some of those conversations about any number of things that can come up as roommate issues often will when you're living in an apartment? So if any of your students are thinking about that, I really encourage them to connect with off-campus student life. They're an awesome resource, and they can help students find off-campus options as well.
Perfect. The next one says, does a student's classification matter when when selecting roommates?
Hmm. I'm not sure what classification means here,
So,
but what I
so,
would
so it's freshman, sophomore, junior, things like that.
so that it may. Really, what's more important is your admit term. So any student that is admitted so for your students who are transfers coming in spring of 2025, any student that was admitted for spring of 2025, fall of 2024, or spring of 2024 are all going to be in the same process, which means that they can group form together as a group very easily. If they're looking to try and form a roommate group with someone who was admitted in fall of 2023 or earlier, your students aren't initially eligible for that process. If that's something that they want to consider, there will be an option for them to choose to opt out of the shared room process and into what's the single plus process. But again, I really want to stress that opting out of that shared process means leaving a process where there will be a space for you to select and going into a process where potentially there may not be a space for them to select. But there is an option for them to be able to do that. They'll get more information about that on the 18th when all of our information goes out.
Mhm. So just to make sure I understand it,
Mhm.
is that we don't actually care what classification or if they're junior or sophomore, but there may be a difference based on what selection process they choose.
That's right. And it's specifically based on when you were admitted to the university as opposed to what your actual class year is.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep.
So when will the numbers or the appointment numbers Inspire be finalized for room selection?
I believe when I hear numbers, what you're asking about is room selection priority.
Mhm.
We will be recalculating that the week before students can start requesting an appointment for online room selection. So by the Friday before, which I'm not remembering exactly what date that is, but by the Friday before the 18th, I think it's probably the 14th, maybe Valentine's Day, um, is likely when students will be able to see that information on their on their Aspire account.
It is Valentine's Day, so maybe
Yes.
easier for folks to remember. All right. The next question says, can you share a link to these slides? We will not share a link to the slide, but this recording will be available on our website, which is umass.edu/parents. And it will be available on our Facebook. So you will be able to watch it there and on our YouTube. So the next question is there a form to fill out if the returning student wants to have a random roommate and they don't have anyone in mind for next year?
So that's really not necessary. In the way that our online room selection process works, if you're just an individual, one of the things that we would really encourage is that students that are individuals try to select into spaces that are already partially occupied. Um, to try and support those students that are part of roommate groups. Something that I think a lot of students sometimes think is that if they select into a room that's completely empty, they can there's a chance that that room will stay empty all the way into fall semester. I will unfortunately pop that bubble right now. We will likely fill every single space on our campus, either by the end of this process or over the course of the summer, assigning new students, unassigned students. And so if you don't have a specific person in mind, and you're okay with living with someone that you don't know, select into a space that already has someone living in it. That's 100% okay. Once the process ends, you'll be able to get the information of who your roommate is, and then you can start having conversations and doing some planning around what being roommates will be like come fall semester.
Thank you. So Justin, the next question is if a student has a disability
Mhm.
accommodation and wants to room with friends,
Mhm.
should that student be the leader? And
Not
will
necessarily. So that goes right back to what I was saying earlier, which is we want the person who knows the process best to be the group leader. If I, as someone that doesn't have a disability accommodation, forms a roommate group with someone who does, if I'm the group leader, I can select at what is ultimately going to be that person's appointment time, the person that has the accommodation. That isn't actually something that I spoke to, but I will name this. Students that are registered with disability services and have a housing accommodation that impacts their appointment. Um, those students get appointments that will start before students that do not have a disability accommodation that impacts their appointment. But again, if I form a roommate group with someone who has that earlier appointment time, as the group leader, I will select for the group when their appointment starts. Whoever the earliest appointment time is in the group is when the group leader can select.
got it. And so that was the follow-up question is will they get a priority for the appropriate room?
That's right.
Yes.
And for students that have a private room accommodation, something else to keep in mind, because we know that often the students that get what's called a private room accommodation typically are not looking to live with roommates. Students that have a private room accommodation will also be given an appointment to the single plus process. So students that have a private room accommodation will get both the shared room process and the single plus process, and their appointment will start at the beginning of both of those processes to ensure that they have the best opportunity to select into a private room, or if they want to select into a shared room with a friend, they'll be able to get the benefit there as well.
The next question it says, can CHC eligible students pick specific rooms within each suite during the selection process?
Absolutely, yes. So when online room selection happens, you'll see all the spaces that are available. You'll see which suites are what. You'll usually see like 408B and 408A, for example, and something like that. And when as the group leader, if you have a group leader situation, the group leader can select folks into whatever spaces in that room that they'd like. If you're selecting as an individual, you can select into any one of those spaces that's still available.
Okay, great. So that their follow-up question is does the group leader make the room assignments per student, or does the student still do that part for themselves?
Yep, absolutely. The group leader is taking on everything. So that's again with such an important responsibility. So make sure that they take that really seriously because we don't want a group leader to make a poor decision that impacts two, three, or four other students in the process.
So how does it work if a group leader doesn't have the first appointment out of the group?
The group leader will be able to select at whoever has the earliest appointment time. So the group leader will be able to go into the system and see when everyone's appointments begin. And whichever one of those is the earliest appointment time, that's when they can select on behalf of the entire group.
Right. The next question it says, should students complete the occupancy lease and housing now, or do they a housing profile now, or should they wait until February 18th?
They should wait until February 18th. Just to note, all of your students who are applying for on-campus housing right now have already done that for the spring, but they'll need to re-complete all those steps for our fall processes. So wait until the 18th, and then they can complete all three steps: sign the occupancy license, submit the housing profile, and request your appointment all at once. And also just worth noting, we have computers here set up in our office. And I know that a lot of students have laptops with them nowadays, but if they'd like to just come to our office and make sure that they're doing it right, we will walk them step by step through that right on the 18th. They can come right into our office and we'll make sure that everything's done correctly.
The next question says, if a student has a single through disability services, does
Mhm.
the student still set up a housing appointment as you discussed?
Yes, they do. So every student has to request an appointment. Having an accommodation through disability services means that you will receive an earlier appointment for any processes that you're eligible for and have taken all of the appropriate steps to request an appointment for. So yes, every student that is looking to live on campus for the spring or for the fall has to request an appointment. And then ultimately, they will also have to select an assignment when that appointment begins. And so, yes, even a student with a disability accommodation would need to do those steps.
Do you know how many single spaces are available for juniors who are not in the honors college?
That is a very specific question, and
And
so
probably
unfortunately,
vary.
that's
Yeah.
not something I have specifically in the back of my head. What I will say is that, there are quite a few single rooms. There are singles in all of our areas of campus, with the exception of Orchard Hill, and that ultimately, whatever options that we have will be available in that process. The majority of singles, just for some context for students, are located either in the Southwest residential area or the Sylvan residential area are where the majority of our singles are. But again, we have singles everywhere but the Orchard Hill residential area.
Right. The next question says, my student is transferring for spring 2025.
Mhm.
Are the housing assignments being posted this Friday?
That is correct. Yes, we are. Today's the deadline for students to apply for on-campus housing. And so if you haven't, like I said at the beginning, tell your student to call us to make sure that we get it done for them. Or if they have questions and want to be sure, have them give us a call. We can help them walk through their own versions of Spire to see if that they've done everything that they need to do. And yes, we will be releasing new student assignments on Friday, the 17th. Now, I want to stress, if something happens and somehow your student misses the preference application deadline, does not apply for housing before the end of the day today, we have no concerns about being able to house students in the spring. If they miss our deadline, reach out to us as soon as they realize it. We can talk with them about options. We will absolutely have a space for them for the spring.
The next question says, are second year students guaranteed on campus housing?
So the only students that are guaranteed on-campus housing are freshmen. But ultimately, what we're trying to do with the processes that I kind of outlined for you all for the fall, anyone who's given an appointment for that shared room selection process, which ultimately is going to be the majority of sophomores when we're talking about those admit periods that we're looking at, as long as you're participating, you should be able to pick a housing assignment. And that includes the students that we're talking about today as well.
Yeah. Very similar question is the next one is, again, is my rising junior who's lived on campus their first year and second year guaranteed housing if they've done everything by the deadlines?
So unfortunately, no. They'll absolutely have the opportunity to select spaces. The process will run right along the same time as the timelines that we've talked about here. And again, what I want to go back to is that even if a student is not able to select a housing assignment as part of our initial process, in the past few years, we have had very, very high success at helping students who either miss our deadlines, who aren't able to select initially. So even if there's not a space that's available when someone's appointment begins, we will make any of those unselected shared spaces available, which helps a lot of our students in the single plus process. And then we will have processes over the summer as well. I know that sometimes folks want to be 100% that they've solidified their plans. Unfortunately, the spaces that we have are the spaces that we have, and until we get those cancellations, which we know are coming but can't plan for until we have them, we have been really, really happy to share that any student who wants on-campus housing has been able to get it in recent years. They just need to keep working with us.
The next question says, are there North apartments that are specified for CHC students?
There are actually. We have because the Commonwealth Honors College does not have any residence halls that are open over the breaks, the fourth and fifth floors of North D specifically will be available in the CHCRC apartment process. And that is essentially the break housing option for students who are members of the Commonwealth Honors College. Any spaces in that process that don't get selected will be available as well to just students that have an appointment for the single plus process to select into those spaces also.
The next question says, does an upperclassman with an accommodation for a single on campus get to choose their preference for a living area?
They do. So again, the way that online room selection is going to work is that they'll have the ability to search for spaces all across campus. And so a student, whether they have an accommodation or not, could see what spaces are available in every area of campus and then make a decision about what feels like the best fit for them when their appointment begins.
Next question says, are there tools available for upperclassmen to find roommates?
So unfortunately, there's not any specific tools, but some of the tools that we've seen that have been successful for students is using social media. A really good place that I've seen is that probably one of our most active social media areas is the UMass Reddit page, where I've seen a lot of students been able to connect with other students that are looking for housing. But really, anywhere that your student exists online is a really great place. And then, of course, talking with your colleagues that are in classes with you, talking with your floor mates, talking with your friends just in general, you may be able to connect with other folks there as well.
Next question says, if a student forms a roommate group with one other person, but
Mhm,
and has the opportunity to select a single room,
mhm.
will they be able to select the single and what happens to the group?
Great. So when you have formed a roommate group, you can only select if the entire group will fit into that space. So, say in this situation, this happens, a group leader or a group member sees that their appointment has started and that there's a single room that they'd like to select. The group leader does have the ability to dissolve that roommate group to let everybody in the group go back to their individual times. When that happens, the member or the group leader would then be able to select into the single as long as that single room is still available.
The next question says, what is a single plus process? If you have a roommate in mind, you picked shared room selection, how would you have more than one process?
Sure. So this is one of those pieces where I don't want to get too into the weeds because we're a couple of months in advance. But essentially, the best way to think about it is that anyone who was admitted from spring 2024 or more recently, including your incoming transfer students, they're going to be in a process that only includes, well, primarily includes shared rooms. There will be a limited number of singles in the Sylvan area because those are suite style housing. And so what that means is that the options that you're going to see within that process are primarily going to be shared rooms that other students will live in with your student. The single plus process, which is only going to be available for students admitted in fall 2023 or later, or earlier, I'm sorry, that process is primarily going to include only single rooms. And there will be some shared rooms there as well, because we won't need to use every shared room on campus to accommodate the shared room selection process. That process will have exactly enough beds for the students who have an appointment for it. Any spaces that we don't use for that process will also be available in the single plus process. So if your student is someone who gets an appointment for the single plus process and they have someone else in that process that they want to live with, there will be some shared rooms there, but the majority of the spaces will be private rooms.
So the next question says, if a roommate group contains students, only some of whom are members of CHC
Mhm,
or the honors college,
mhm.
is CHC housing available to the group, or is it only non-CHC housing available
Right.
for all of that mixed group to live together?
So this is one of those pieces that's a little hard to talk about a couple months in advance, but basically every one of these processes that I've discussed, the CHC apartment process, the CHC suite process, the single plus process, the shared room process, are all separate appointments. So there'll be separate processes that include separate pools of spaces within them. You can only form a roommate group for one of these processes if everyone that is part of that group has an appointment. So in the example that you shared, if say the fourth person is not a member of CHC, then the group leader would not be able to invite that person into a CHCRC appointment group, if that makes sense. Um, we'll also be doing a presentation specifically to students that are members of CHCRC. They should keep an ear out from the Commonwealth Honors College and specifically RAs in the halls as well. If you're living in the Commonwealth Honors College, come to that session as well because it's a little bit of a smaller group and we'll probably have a little bit of ability to actually answer more questions directly about that too. That's going to be in late February, if I remember correctly.
And our last question that I have, it says, if a student is in a group, will
Mhm.
only be shown suites with ample enough room for all members in the group. So if a student really wants a single, they may not be able to see that option if they're in a group.
So when you're in a group, you can run a search normally the same way that anyone else can, and you can see the spaces as whatever spaces are available. There are tools as part of our searching the process that students can use to search for spaces where you can limit that option, which is something that we would encourage groups to do, is to look for spaces that have enough vacancies to support the number of students within the group. But unless you set that criteria, you are going to be able to see all available spaces on campus when you're running your searches.
Mhm. All right, Justin, my last question for you is if there was one thing you wanted folks to remember, what would you want them to remember from today?
March 14th. I cannot stress this enough. Anyone who misses that deadline is in a much more challenging situation. Again, I feel really confident that we'll be able to help folks who miss those deadlines, but I would rather those students have more ability to work within our on-time processes and get to use all of our options to make changes over the summer. Students who miss that deadline likely won't be able to select until late July, and it will be a much more limited set of options that you'll be able to see. So make sure that your student requests that appointment by the 14th. And if there's any reason that they have confusion or are unsure about anything, have them either come to our office or call us at the phone number that I've got listed there or email us at the email that I've got listed there. We are happy to answer questions. We always want to talk to you before the deadline when we can help, as opposed to after the deadline when we're much more limited in what we can offer.
All right, Justin. One last question came in, and so I'm gonna let you answer this one because I know this impacts a lot of folks. Is what happens for students who need break housing, and I know that they need to prepare from this at the beginning, and so I
Yeah.
want you to talk about that.
Great. So as part of the search tools that we use, there is a way for you to specifically search for residence halls that are open over the breaks. Um, when the search results, when you pull up the search results, there is an option that's listed there for you to choose either to search by a special housing option, or if you just search for all campus, there's a column called living options. And if it says break housing in that living option, it means that that residence hall is open over the break periods, which would mean Thanksgiving, winter session, and spring break. Just for folks to know, the buildings that are open over the breaks, Prince Hall in Southwest, Grayson Hall in Orchard Hill, and Cashin Hall in the Sylvan residential area are all more traditional style residence halls, but also the North Apartments are also open over the breaks. And lastly, Brett Hall, which is in Central, is an opt-in option where if a student selects into Brett Hall, they have the option during the fall semester to reach out to us and say, I'd like to stay, and we will let it make it so that they can stay. And so if that's something your student needs, they should really specifically be looking for those options in those buildings specifically.
All right. Thank you for answering that one last question. Thank you all for being here. This webinar will be posted on our website and on our Facebook, hopefully later today, if not tomorrow. And then we appreciate you coming and we hope you join us on Wednesday to learn about spring move-in. Thank you so much, Justin, for being here. And thank you all for being here with us as well.
Thank you all. Have a great day.